All right, today we're going to show you how to correctly use a table saw. Table saw is one of those things in life that you will use quite a bit. Even at home, there's probably a bunch of you that have table saws at home. We're going to show you the correct use of it. Now, always keep the guards in place. Here is the guard on our machine, which works very wonderful. Always have the guards in place. I know some of you that at home have table saws at home where guards are removed. Please be safe. Always keep the guards in place. Make any adjustments. Now, we will have several adjustments on here as far as raising the blade. This wheel up front completely raises the blade for the thickness of the board. This is a handle that you're going to use. It has a lock knob in the center. If it turns hard, make sure you loosen that lock knob so you don't wreck the hand wheel. On the left side of the machine, there's also a hand wheel. That hand wheel is for angles only. Do not touch that handle. We do not cut angles in this for our projects. If you would mess with that handle by accident, just call a teacher over so that we can correct the mistake. You want the saw blade 1 tooth high. So what we do is put your board that you're going to cut, and we raise or lower this so it's 1 tooth high. On the blade you can see where it cuts. So it's 1 tooth high. Keep your hands 4 inches away from the machine. Never any closer. 4 inches. No freehand cutting. What do I mean by freehand cutting? It means that you are going to cut this board like this. That is a very, very no-no, and I've seen too many people at home do that. Please don't do that. That will get you hurt in a bad way. Do not make any freehand cutting. The miter gauge, which is, this is the miter gauge, and the fence cannot be used at the same time. You can use this one or the fence, but never together. So never use the miter gauge. We always use a push stick. The push stick will be found on the saw. If the push stick is missing, we need to make sure you tell the teacher so we can find it and get it back in there. You stand to one side of the blade. There's kickback that may or may not happen. It doesn't happen very frequently with this style of saw. But a kickback would mean the board would come out at you. Your right hip, if you're right-handed, your right hip should be on the left side of the blade, not in direct path of it. Remove all scraps after the blade is stopped, and we will show you that during the demonstration. Never ever reach in and grab scrap boards till the blade has stopped. Do not leave the machine running like you would with your car. Don't leave your car running out in the parking lot all night, do ya? Make sure you shut the machine off. Do not leave the machine until the blade is stopped. The fence is for ripping only. Fence is ripping only, and we wrote it right on here with a big piece of white tape. For ripping only. The miter gauge is for cross cutting. This board, the grain goes like this. This is ripping, this is cross cutting. There's numerous charts hanging up in the room. If you forget about that or need to be reminded, from this saw right here, I can see a set of charts over there, and I can see a set of charts up near the front of the room. Make sure you double check that. You need to know what you're doing, either cross cutting or ripping. This right here is called the splitter. What this does is, as you're cutting your board, this will keep, sometimes boards have energy built in them. The splitter will keep the board open as we go to cut. All right, so it's really important that that splitter stays there. On home, I've seen, not at my home, but in other places I've seen where they remove the guards, remove the splitters, but they help you and they will prevent you from being hurt. So don't remove the splitter. This is obviously the table. This is the angle adjustment we told you not to touch. This is the blade height adjustment. All right, we've already explained that. This is the rip fence, the fence, and this is a miter gauge. Now, when a saw makes a cut, it's called a kerf. The kerf is the saw blade. You need to know that because this blade cuts 1/8 of an inch off from the board. It disappears into sawdust. That's called the kerf. So you need to understand that to make sure that you cut your board correctly. Kickback, as I explained, is any time a piece of board will come back out of the saw. Does that happen very often? No and yes. It does not happen if you use it correctly, but sometimes it can, so be prepared. Remember the right hip on the left side. Ripping, once again, rip cut is with the grain, cross cut is crossing the grain. The splitter's right here, and this has anti-kickback teeth, 2 on it. There's 2 sets of them to prevent the boards from coming back. Now, let's demonstrate. Well, first off, this blade right here, if you can take a look, this was misfired due to the high moisture of a board. This is the only piece of equipment we have in the shop that's actually a smart tool. All right? This happened because the wood had a high moisture in it, would sense something was wrong, and it fired. This is a bad mistake and costs a lot of money. It destroyed the blade and the cartridge. The cartridge is found inside the machine. On a table saw, you can do numerous cuts. Any cut on the outside is called a rabbet. Any cut inside the board like this right here, is called a groove. This is with the grain. And this is called a dado, against the grain. Those are different cuts that can be used. We will not be doing a lot of these right here, but some cases on some your projects we may have to. Now, as we proceed on, what we're going to do is we've got to clear this part of the table. I'm going to show you how to do a rip cut first. So now, I'm going to rip this board, so I need to prepare ahead of time. First thing you need on is safety glasses. The next thing you need to turn the machine on. There's a little red switch with a yellow knob on it. You turn it on. There's a red light that blinks and a green light. The red light's blinking is getting the machine ready to accept a cut. This is smarting up the machine. If we look at the green light, it is now ready to go. So now I'm gonna grab a board, we're gonna rip, means with the grain. I'm gonna take this board that I have, and I'm gonna cut it down to 3.5 inches. That's what my project would require. So now, first thing I need to do is make sure I have a push stick. I'm gonna come up here to make sure, visually inspect everything, that nothing looks bad. I'm gonna come up here, I'm gonna lower this down, so it's 1 tooth high, tighten this up. Now, on the fence, we have 2 gauges. The left side we do not use, it's more for left-hand cutting. If you are a lefty, just please ask the teacher for instructions on that. Most of you will cut right hand. There's a red line right there. I'm gonna set that for exactly 3.5 inches. Set it for 3.5, lock the blade, check the fence to make sure it locks. If the guard's up, bring the guard back down. And check for any loose, little pieces of wood there first. Now, the next thing I'm gonna do is I have my push stick right here, so as I go to do this, I wanna make sure everything, there should be nothing here except for my board and the push stick that's very accessible. So I'm gonna turn the machine on, full power. Now, next thing you need to do is, we don't have running right now, but what needs to be running in the shop? You need to have the dust collector system turned on. This does generate a lot of dirt and dust and everything else. That needs to be turned on. So now, this board is less than 4 inches, so therefore I have to use a push stick because it breaks that margin of safety. It's greater, or it's 4 inches, remember? You need to have that. So now, this hand right here, hand pushes in, keeps it tight against the fence. My thumb keeps the board down. As I go, there's an angle on the fence. So now I'm going to push. How far can this hand go forward? It needs to stop the minute it hits here. So this is how we do it. I'm going to grab the board, keep it pushed in, pushed down. Now that the board is on the fence, I use the push stick. Push it all the way off. I turn the machine off. There's a scrap of wood in there. I need to wait for the blade to stop. Once it's stopped, then I can clean this out. We do have boxes of wood by each saw to help when the wood falls so it don't get broke, and that's where the scrap wood goes. Now, I've just successfully ripped my board to 3.5. Now I have another board that I'm going to rip. This board is 5 3/4 inches. I want to rip it down to 5.5. So now 5.5, I set my gauge just like before. Push stick right where I want it. Now it is greater than 4 inches, so therefore I technically do not need to use a push stick. And I will show you that. If you feel safer using a push stick, you're more than welcome to do that. But I will show you how to use it without a push stick. Remember, hand in, hand down. Push it all the way through. My hip is on the left side. There's scrap in there. And I need to wait until the scrap or the saw stops so I can remove the scrap. Here is the scrap, I throw it in there. Now, one reminder, the only true measurement that I have is the blade is parallel right here with the fence. This is my good board. Anything out here is scrap. So you gotta put your good edge on the fence and you're cutting the scrap off. Sometimes students confuse that a little bit. They try to cut the scrap off here, but now my board is parallel this way. These lines are exactly parallel. That is how we rip a board that's less than 4 and how we rip a board that is greater than 4. Now, one more cut that we have on here is called a cross cut. There's the grooves in here where the miter gauge slides in and out. So now we're going to pick up the fence. I'm going to cross cut this board. I'm going to cross cut it a little bit. And if you have any confusion on the process and cutting, make sure you watch the video on how to square up a board. So now I'm going to set it right here with the blade not moving. I'm going to put it right here. I'm going to trim off just a little bit of this board. Now the first thing I do is I hang onto that board. Do not let it move. Fence or the guard comes down. Miter gauge comes back. So now here's what I'm going to do before I actually make a cut. I want you to practice once. We're going to cut through, pull the board back, then come back. So once again, as we're cutting, the cut's all done,
We slide the board to your left if you're right-handed, and we bring it back. So now let me actually do an actual cut for you. So now we have right here, so I'm grabbing that miter gauge, I'm squeezing right here. If I hang out here, the board's gonna go that way. So now, when I turn the saw on, I'm going to cut. Pull back. You can hear the strap board in there. This is why you need to stay to the left side. Wait for the blade to stop, reach in here, and pull the chunk out. Then I would flip the board over, put a mark on the edge of the board, line it up, and then I could cross-cut my board to actual length. If you have any questions on this, make sure you feel free to ask.